Think about the Premier League. Fast-paced football, packed out stadiums every week, the best of the best, whether it's players or managers. But most importantly, money. Lots and lots and lots of money. If we rewind back to the start of the Premier League, you can see here the 22 teams that made up England's Premier League, the best of the best. And there's a common theme you can see here, teams in dynasties that were made with this money, and the teams that couldn't keep up. The modern game revolves around money, and it all started with the creation of the Premier League. So why don't we take another step even further back, and look at the season before the Prem was created, and specifically one team, who make up a perfect metaphor for what modern football means. Luton Town. Luton were founded in 1885, in very unusual circumstances. Before Luton Town there was already a team called Luton Wanderers, who'd been around since 1880. Then in January 1885, club secretary Herbert Spratley arranged a secret meeting of the club's committee with the hopes of changing the name of the club to Luton Town, aiming to unify Luton and likely prevent the growth of other teams in the town, such as Luton Excelsior. Spratley and the committee renamed the club, which proved massively unpopular with the fans. And a few months later, Spratley created a public meeting where he could persuade fans of Luton Wanderers to come round to his idea. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work, so Spratley had two options. Either respect the opinions of the fans who spent their hard-earned money supporting the club they loved, or jump ship and create a new team called Luton Town. He did the latter. Within just 2 years, Luton Town had become the only side in Luton, with the original Luton Wanderers dissolving in 1887, and Spratley's dream of one club to unify the town finally coming into fruition. Skip forward about 70 years, and Luton Town, having now been a well-established Football League side for well over 3 decades, found themselves in the second division going into the 1954-55 season, where they won promotion to the first division for the first time ever through the goals of club legend and all-time top scorer Gordon Turner. And just a few seasons later, Luton had made the FA Cup final, finishing runners-up to Nottingham Forest on the 2nd of May 1959. The club would finally get their hands on some major silverware in 1988, where they won the League Cup, beating an Arsenal side featuring legends like Tony Adams as Luton's second greatest goalscorer of all time. Brian Steen scored a brace to help Luton to a 3-2 win. The club were well and truly in their golden era, having now survived the 6th straight season in the first division, by far their best ever spell in the top flight. Now, despite having finished in the top half of 3 seasons in a row, it wasn't the Hatters' on-field performances making the news. It was the hysteria of their plastic pitch. Hundreds of players competing at Kenilworth Road in the 80s would suffer a variety of comical injuries, such as carpet burns, with the artificial pitch making the bounce of the ball massively unpredictable. After decades of being known as one of the yo-yo teams in English football, Luton had found their key to success: AstroTurf. In the years following their League Cup success, Luton would struggle in the league, finishing 16th, 17th and 18th in the seasons prior to the 91-92 campaign. In each of these seasons, Luton would be heavily reliant on their home form to keep them up. But then in 91-92, the final season before the creation of the Premier League, Luton were forced to rip up their iconic plastic pitch and replace it with grass. Finally, after years of being a thorn in the sides of teams across the country, Luton were relegated, and this is where our story really begins. Having been relegated, Luton lost 10 players and then failed to replace them properly, finishing 20th in the league, just 2 points off relegation. In a season where the first division of English football had rejuvenated itself with glitz and glamour, a team iconic to the top flight of English football for a decade previously was struggling. Money had blinded those at the top, and it almost felt as if football had lost its way. Of course, teams get relegated and have poor seasons, but the contrast in what Luton had meant for the culture of football in Britain and what the Premier League had stood for was huge. To some, it might have just been a side with a plastic pitch, but to others it was a team that working class fans could relate to. A team who had to use all sorts of sneaky tactics to battle with the elites of English football, and once more money was pumped into football and rules were changed, they were unable to stay at the top. It almost feels like the relegation of Luton was a metaphor for the rebranding of the Premier League and what it did to the English game. Having finished 20th again in 93-94 and then improving with a 16th finish in their third season in the second tier, Luton were relegated once again in 95-96, finishing bottom of the league. Having beaten Arsenal and gotten a point against Man United just 4 seasons before, Luton found themselves 2 promotions and a million miles away from the supposed promised land. In their first season in the third tier for just over 30 years, Luton came third, missing out on promotion by just a couple of points and losing the playoff semi-final to Crewe 4-3 on aggregate. Sadly for Luton though, things would get even worse before they got better, as in 2001 they were relegated to the 4th tier of English football. The Hatters had gone down 3 tiers in the same amount of time as they'd spent in Division 1. Life was looking bleak for Luton fans. But in just 1 year they managed to stop the rot and turn it around, winning promotion back to the 3rd tier at the first time of asking, scoring a club record 97 points in 1 season. Steve Howard scored 24 goals in the 01-02 campaign, making him Luton's top scorer, something he'd repeat for the next 3 seasons they spent in the 3rd tier, where in the final of those 3, Luton once again won promotion, this time round as champions, breaking their points record again with 98 points in 1 season. But just like always with Luton, everything wasn't as it would seem. With more money being pumped into the top level of English football, it meant the teams further down the leagues had to spend more and more to try and catch up. The problem being the money at the top wasn't trickling down, leaving many clubs having to spend more than they could afford to while chasing promotion. Luton of course were no different, and the club was placed in administration in 2004, with owner John Gurney having been forced out of the club. Now remember the name John Gurney, as I'll definitely be doing a follow-up video about his time at Luton, which lasted just 55 days and involved some absolutely ridiculous stories. This turmoil behind the scenes would have a massive effect on Luton's playing squad and performances on the pitch, but somehow they managed to stay up in their first season in the Championship, finishing 10th. This is where things went downhill. Luton were relegated from the Championship in the 2006-07 season, finishing 23rd, and in November 2007 they were placed in administration once again, leaving them with a 10-point deduction for their 07-08 League One campaign. Things got worse as they were relegated for the second year in a row, finishing the season with just 33 points. Now if you thought that was bad enough, Luton's 08-09 season is truly extraordinary. Now a bit of backstory on the season. At some point in the mid-2000s, while Luton were in the midst of selling the large majority of their squad, somehow £13 million went missing. You may be wondering, how did you lose £13 million? Well, the answer is you don't. What happened was when buying players, Luton had somehow paid everybody wrong. Not the wrong amount, not the wrong people, they just did it wrong. All the required paperwork was submitted correctly between all parties involved, and all the money was paid on time. But somehow nobody but the board of Luton Town knew that they'd spent this £13 million on players. Not even the managers knew about this. It's truly one of the most bizarre situations I've ever heard of in my life, and if I tried to explain it more, I wouldn't be able to do it justice. So I'll link some sources in the description if you'd like to read more about it. I'm sure you're confused and wondering why on earth I've brought all that up. Well, I'll get onto that now. Going into the 08-09 season, Luton were docked 20 points for breaking rules on leaving administration. Making this worse, Leeds had done the exact same thing just a year before and only been docked 15. Oh yeah, and they were also docked another 10 for the whole £15 million weird transfer thing. This meant that Luton started the season on minus 30 points. To put that into perspective, that is nearly 3 times as many points as Derby scored in the entire 07-08 campaign. And they had to overturn that about 2.5 times over if they just wanted to stay in the league that season. But Luton weren't going to just give up. They won 13 games and lost just 16, finishing the season with 26 points, which is the same tally that Scunthorpe reached last season in League 2. To make this even more impressive, the Hatters won just 4 fewer games than Shrewsbury, who made the playoff final that season. However, despite performances on the pitch being good, Luton still went down and found themselves relegated to non-league for the first time in their history. But we're not done yet. There was something else incredible about this season. Luton managed to win the Football League trophy, meaning they'd been relegated and won silverware in the same season. This also brings me to another point I wanted to make. What is a major trophy? To many this may sound stupid, but I personally believe a major trophy is subjective. The word major is defined as something important, serious or significant. The Community Shield is classified as a major trophy, whereas the Football League trophy is not. Some may agree with this, but I want to ask you one thing. Could you seriously say that Liverpool winning the Community Shield this July was more significant or important to their club and fan base than Luton winning the Football League trophy? An achievement which would have given an undefinable amount of hope and joy to the fan base, as they had something they could cling on to and be proud of, in a season where they saw extreme mismanagement from previous owners punishing them and forcing them into relegation. There's no way. This is why I think it's important to add that if Liverpool winning a glorified friendly is counted as a major trophy, then Luton's winning the Football League trophy should be counted as the club's second major success. Moving on to their 09-10 non-league campaign, and the Hatters managed to finish second, but were knocked out in the playoffs by York City. Another 3 seasons followed where Luton finished 3rd, 5th and 7th, and it looked like they were slipping further into the deep dark cave known as non-league football. Then came the 2013-14 season. 101 points, a first place finish and finally promotion back to the Football League, spearheaded by a young Andre Gray who scored 30 goals that season. Luton were on their way back. In their first season back in the EFL, the Hatters managed an 8th place finish, just 1 place off the playoffs. And 2 years later in 2016-17, they came 4th, again just 1 place off something special. This time round, automatic promotion. They lost the playoff semi-final 6-5 in aggregate to Blackpool, but then in just their 4th season back in the Football League, Luton won promotion to League One, finishing second with 88 points. Now if we've learned anything about Luton's recent history, it's that they love extremes. So what did they do now they were promoted back to League One? Win the league with 94 points and finally found themselves back in the Championship, where they belonged. Now in case you needed a recap, in 40 years Luton have been promoted to the First Division, won their first and technically only ever major honour, managed 10 straight seasons in the top flight, but then in the next 10 years found themselves being relegated 3 times. They then managed 2 promotions in 4 years to get back to the Championship, when they then suffered entering administration 2 times in 3 years. got relegated 3 times in a row and slipped straight out of the Football League for the first time ever. Were docked 40 points in 2 seasons, then got promoted back to the EFL. They managed to break their points tally 3 separate times, the final of which they managed to break over 100 points, and then got back-to-back promotions from League 2 straight up to the Championship. Apologies if I missed anything out there, or just made you dizzy. Luckily we can finally chill out because we've made it to the 2019-20 season, which would be completely normal on the pitch and off it. Oh, other than the fact that their manager Nathan Jones had left just before getting them promoted from League 1 and joined Stoke City, leaving them back in the Championship and without a manager. This obviously didn't go well, and after 37 games they found themselves 23rd in the table and doomed. It would take something unimaginable to save Luton now. Almost like a global pandemic or something, meaning football would be paused for a few months so they had time to sack their manager and bring back their former manager who'd also just been sacked by Stoke City, and would then have enough time to work with the players he already knew how to get the best out of. Or something along them lines, but I'm sure that didn't happen. For those of you who may not get it, that is exactly what happened. On the 28th of May 2020, Nathan Jones rejoined Luton, and a few weeks later, the season started back up again, giving Jones 9 games to save the Hatters. They won 4, drew 4 and lost just once, keeping them up by 3 points in the most Luton way of doing a great escape. The next season they finished a comfortable 12th, and last season managed a 6th place finish, putting them in the playoffs with a chance of being promoted back to the First Division and up to the Premier League for the first time ever. Unfortunately they lost in the semi-finals and were unable to reach the promised land, but they'd made an important point to everyone in the last few seasons. They wanted to return to the First Division and prove to the richest league in the world that money isn't everything. As of recording, Luton sit 11th in the league, but are just 2 points off the playoffs with 36 games to play, so are definitely still in the hunt for promotion. Myself and many other fans were dreaming of seeing Luton's iconic Kenilworth Road Stadium in the Premier League, forcing the biggest stars in world football to quite literally play in someone's back garden. This dream may not be over, but time's running out, with plans for a new stadium to be completed in 2024. Meaning that the Hatters need to be promoted this year if we're ever to see a full season of Kenilworth Road in the Prem. I'm not too sure how to end this video because it's been truly bonkers, so I'll leave you with this Steve McNulty quote. When there is love, there is Luton. That's not actually a Steve McNulty quote, by the way. I just changed this Gandhi quote so it'd work better with the video. If you did enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe. As I mentioned, I'll be doing another video on the ownership of Luton by John Gurney. If there's any other teams, players or topics you want us to do a video on, make sure you comment them down below. Links to our socials will be in the description. Enjoy your day and goodbye.